We made this.
Hello and welcome everyone to a podcast devoted to the sounds of cinema and discussion about them between the notes, which is where we come in. I'm Tony Black.
I'm Sean Wilson.
And I'm Amon Warmann.
And in our latest episode of Between the Notes, in which we of course have a special guest, we'll be presenting music from and discussing the work of Alan Silvestri, Hans Zimmer, James Newton Howard, James Horner, Jerry Goldsmith, Henry Jackman, Danny Elfman and John Williams. And even a bit more, because this is a bumper special edition geared around the brand new Alan Silvestri score for Avengers Endgame. And we thought we'd go full on superheroes today, which is going to be quite fun. So it's just before we start, because normally it's just the two of us, it's great to have you on, Amon. Thanks for joining us for this Avengers special.
Thank you for having me.
You know, you're quite well known online, so give everyone a little taste of what it is what your stuck in trade is and what it is about you love about film music, just briefly then before we carry on.
So I guess first thing is I'm a regular contributor to Empire magazine these days, but I also freelance for a ton of other sites as well. In addition to being a video editor, my latest sort of annual video, the Summer Blockbuster montage, has been released just a few days ago, so you can check that out now on YouTube, or you can find it on my Twitter feed as my pinned tweet. And in terms of film music, what I love about film music, wow, how to answer that question?
It's a big question.
How to answer that question in a concise manner. There are many moments in film where a big part of the reason for me why certain moments are memorable is because of the music, and it's especially true, I think, when it comes to a really good superhero score, as I'm sure we'll get into over the next however many minutes or so. And I love sort of scores that are so great that when you listen back to them, it puts you back in that moment and puts you back in. It makes you visualize how you felt when you watched that moment for the first time. And, you know, I guess that's just one of many, many reasons why I love film scores, but that's probably one of the bigger ones.
Yeah, and I think we've got a few of them coming up in Avengers Endgame, I would definitely say. So a few good examples of that. Yeah. But we will get into that a bit later. We're going to start, though. A feature of the new incarnation of Between the Notes, obviously, is that we tend to do countdowns. We do countdowns whether it's based on a composer. We've done James Horner recently, and we've recently done female composers, counting down a top number of those. And obviously today, given the centre point is Avengers Endgame, we thought we'd do our top 5 superhero movie scores. And this isn't just Marvel Cinematic Universe, this is across the board. And obviously that means we've got some absolute gems. So we're going to go and do our usual sort of system. And we're going to go numbers 5 to 3, and then we're going to talk about the big event, which is Avengers. And then after that, we're going to do our top 2 each. And then we'll do a bit of a wrap-up and talk about something else. And, you know, there is going to be some crossover here, obviously, because there are some scores that really do lift up in terms of the pantheon of these things. But we'll see. We'll get into it and we'll talk about it. So let's start then with our special guest for the day. Amon, why don't you give us your 5th best superhero score and why?
Such pressure. I'm going to go. I'm very much on brand with the episode. Number 5. By the way, deciding my top 5 superhero scores of all time was a very difficult exercise. There are many, which I love, and many of them which have high play counts on my iTunes. But at number 5, I put the Avengers, the original 2012 Avengers. Here in the UK, for some reason, it's known as Avengers Assemble, but I'm going to call it Avengers. And it's obviously by Alan Silvestri. I think in the years since we've gotten this score, it has grown in stature as, we've seen multiple Avengers films. we've heard and watched an Avengers movie which didn't really. I mean, it didn't not have it, but it didn't have it in as prominent a way as this first Avengers movie did, and as the subsequent Avengers movies have. I'm talking about Age of Ultron, if it wasn't already clear. But yeah, this Avengers score is just iconic. I mean, talk about the theme. It's now gotten to the stage where it evokes a Pavlovian response in audiences, and that is, very, very difficult to do. It's very, very, very special to see it grow in stature to that point, and it's a beautiful thing to see. But in addition to that, theme, there's plenty of other good music dotted all over the score. I was just looking through the score again in preparation for this pod, and Stark Goes Green and Helicarrier are two really, really great early standouts in the score. For me, I mean, and as much as I love both of those tracks, I think it's the back six where the score is really, really at. Everything from Assemble to The Avengers, the title track, which is, I believe, the final track on the score, is just great. I mean, A Promise might be my favorite track on the entire thing, which has beautiful string work in leading up to a very sort of bombastic rendition of the Avengers theme. And then obviously you got I Got a Ride, you got A Little Help, you got One Way Trip, all of which get callbacks in Avengers Endgame in really big ways, as I'm sure we're going to discuss again. So that's my number 5, Avengers.
Fitting start, I think.
Yeah, couldn't
definitely
agree more. I love the way you say it's not just about the theme, it's about the, as Joss Whedon described, the scene-specific cues that Alan Silvestri is so good at, like the helicarrier cue, like that. And I think you're absolutely right on how it's gained in stature, because I remember at the time there was a bit of scuttle about how the theme was maybe not perceived as being all that memorable as per the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe music. And I've seen people who've correctly said online that's changed now. The perception of that has changed, and this theme is now clearly identified with the Avengers initiative, which is a wonderful thing, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really does. Now you see, I mean, I think, without going into the full discussion of this yet, I think a lot of this that he had in this first album has paid off in Endgame musically. I think there's a lot of connective tissue back to this album, and it's a really rewarding experience when you can track Silvestri's 3 albums now. I think you're going to see it as a bigger, greater body of work, I think.
Absolutely. Thematic continuity is a big, big thing when it comes to superhero scores, and the fact that, in the last couple of years, the MCU has really latched onto it, not just in the Avengers movies, but in the marketing, which is really, really great to see, because I think in basically every single Avengers trailer that we've had in the last couple of years for both Infinity War and Endgame, we've gotten some version, whether it be more somber or more bombastic, of the Avengers theme. So Marvel have clearly recognized how special it is and have really keyed into it in a smart way. For sure.
Sean, then, what's your number 5? I think we're in similar territory here, aren't we?
We are. We're in MCU territory. This is a bit of an Alan Silvestri loving. I've selected Captain America, the First Avenger, and I exactly like that brilliant word used earlier, Pavlovian. That's the perfect description. But isn't that just a great sign of what an extraordinary job these composers do in terms of crafting a melody that gets under your skin and sticks in your head? It's really quite an astonishing. It must be an astonishingly difficult thing to do, and yet someone of Alan Silvestri's stature can pull it off. I think that the reason why I picked this was because, for me, up until the 2011 release of the First Avenger, I had very, very mixed feelings about the quality of the music in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I kind of thought I wasn't keen on Ramin Djawadi's score for Iron Man. Similarly, John Debney's score for Iron Man 2. I thought Thor by Patrick Doyle kind of had its moments, but I think he was being held back. And Alan Silvestri came along, took the bull by the horns and said, no, I'm going to apply this full throttle orchestral bombast, sense of grandeur, sophistication, obviously playing off the sort of nostalgic World War II context. I'm going to take that tone that I established in the likes of Back to the Future and Predator, which is so beloved by film score fans. I'm going to apply it to this MCU context, and it lifted the whole film up. And it's like, wow, this is clearly what these movies have been missing up to this point, and it just reminds you of what a singular voice Silvestri has. It's unmistakable. And yeah, that Captain America march, I mean, rather annoyingly, I believe the full presentation of the march was only available as a digital download. It wasn't actually on the physical album. But yeah, I mean, just in terms of how utterly rousing that main theme is, and also how that Captain America theme has now woven its way into the subsequent Avengers movies. I think it shows there's a very touching loyalty that Silvestri shows to that character. Him acting as Silvestri's kind of debut into this franchise. Yeah, love this score to bits. I think it's brilliant.
I agree that Captain America's March, I recently described it on another podcast as sort of the 1940s Captain America patriotic version of Brian Tyler's Can You Dig It for Iron Man 3. Which I think makes sense. But yeah, no, I've also, in preparation for this pod, I did a lot of preparation for this pod. I just want to say. I recently listened to the John Brown Composer Series episode with Alan Silvestri, which is really, really good. And what I think Alan Silvestri does, and he talks about it on that pod, is when we first hear the theme for Captain America, when we first hear the theme for the Avengers, it's in really landmark moments, and that makes an impact. You know, one of the reasons why that iconic circular shot in the Avengers is as memorable as it is because of the score. And one of the reasons why, you know, that Captain America score is as memorable as it is as well is because the first time you hear it is when he comes out of that chamber and, you know, he's born again as Captain America, and that's like, okay, big. It's the biggest moment of each film, and the score reflects that, and I like that.
Yeah, it shows how well spotted. I mean, obviously, a credit goes to the directors. I mean, Joe Johnston in the case of First Avenger, Joss Whedon in the case of Avengers Assemble, how closely they work with Silvestri in terms of like you say, recognising that. I think the filmmakers deserve their fair share of credit as well for eliciting this kind of music and for eliciting that sense of razor sharp timing in terms of, as you say, like when those themes are going to work at their best.
It is a really good album. I think one thing about it that I liked. I mean, I like the film anyway, and the film sometimes gets a bit rained upon, I think, unfairly. But I think what it does as well is it shows that Marvel are very good at placing, getting the right music for the right time and the right place. You know, it has, like you say, it brings all these elements in. Silvestri brings all these elements in that raise things up a bit, but it also feels very in tune with a wartime adventure. And then why, I know you're less a fan, I know, of The Winter Soldier, Sean, but in terms of a score, but that does a very good job at then switching gears once he's in the present day to be much more of a techno sort of conspiracy thriller. You know, so there's a lot of some of this stuff is carried through, but it goes in its own direction. And I think it sort of establishes that Marvel is good at going all over the map in that way. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think it works more often than people give it credit for. So it's a good example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a franchise that hits a lot of different, like you say, tones and contexts. Yeah, and so one has to appreciate the way that the tone of the music will vacillate and change. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Vacillate's a good word, isn't it? That's an underused word. Tell you what, he's good at this, Amon. He's good at putting out these words.
It's just the odd word.
I'm that one.
So I have gone for my number 5. I've tried to go a bit off-piste with my choices because we have some crossover similarity, and I completely understand some of the bigger choices. But towards the back end, I tried to sort of throw in a couple of extra ones that I am a big fan of anyway, so they would make high up on my list. I started with Kick-Ass, which is a really it's got 5 different composers.
Only 5.
So, yeah, I know. John Murphy, Marius de Vries, Ilan Eshkari, Henry Jackman, and for one track, Danny Elfman. And you'd think that would potentially make an absolute Frankenstein's monster of a score, but it's a really good. I mean, the film's a lot of fun. You know, I mean, the whole Matthew Vaughn's take on Mark Millar's sort of inversion of the comic book story. You know, with the character of Kick-Ass, it's this darkly comic almost take on sort of a mix, say, of Spider-Man and Batman in a way, with the character of Big Daddy and stuff. But it's got a really interesting through line of a score, which I think fits the kind of youthful, joie de vivre of Kick-Ass, but also the brooding intensity of. There we go. That's my one for the day. You've got a little bit of time, Amon, to come up with your word, but we'll get there.
I'm not prepared for this.
Didn't prepare you that one, yeah.
I did have Pavlovian earlier, so yeah.
There you go. That's it. Yeah, we're all done it.
Yeah.
Achievement unlocked. And Big Daddy's theme is a lot more brooding and a lot more mournful. But those are the two that really stick out to me, and it builds in such a great way. There's towards the end of the album, you've got a collection of tracks that really escalate the corridor kitchen standoff and builds up to the fight, which is this great. It's also got a lot of guitar, a lot of rock infused sort of stuff in the background. But it's just I just really like this album, and it always stuck out to me. And the film's really good, and it's one of those that when I was going through all the scores, I was like, you know what, Kick-Ass. Maybe the score doesn't get enough love.
I don't remember much about the score, but I very distinctly remember the track I believe you're alluding to, which is Big Daddy Kills, and that definitely sticks in the memory. Great scene, great score to the scene, but in terms of the rest of the score, it's not really coming to mind. That's not to say that it isn't. I guess it's a little bit to say that it isn't memorable. There's also something to say. I have not revisited it in a very long time, either the film or the score. So,
well, it's 10 years. It's about 10 years now, so that's fair enough. Some of these other scores are a little bit fresher in the memory.
Absolutely.
So no, that's that makes sense really.
I'm with you. I probably need to go back and listen to this again. I mean, I was always kind of curious as to why there were so many composers used in the film. I wonder if it's because they weren't quite sure what direction they wanted to go in with an original score, so maybe they just enlisted lots of people just to try and, maybe like that various people threw things at the wall and some of it stuck and some of it didn't. I mean, for me, the bits that I remember in the film and the needle drop sequence, like the use of the banana splits and Joan Jett and things like when Hit Girl comes in for the first time, those are the bits that tend to stick more in my mind. But I mean, there's no denying that some remarkably talented people are at work in this score, and clearly Matthew Vaughn, the director, must have liked working with Henry Jackman, because then Henry Jackman went on to do Kingsman. So I wonder if maybe Henry Jackman was perhaps the dominant presence behind the scenes. But I mean, that's all speculation. I think I need to go back and revisit this score. I love the film.
Yeah, the film's really good. The only thing I do know for certain is that the one track that Danny Elfman scored, Walk to Rasul's, was partly because he was referenced. Danny Elfman was referenced in the original comic, so I think that was a way of them tipping their hat to the actual comic book. But yeah, there you go. So that's my number 5. Let's move on to the number 4s then. So, Amon, let's go back to you then. What is your 4th best score and why?
Yeah, my 4th best score is a very, very recent entry, but for me, whereas Avengers is the most important score in the MCU, the best score in the MCU is Black Panther by Ludwig Goransson, and that is my pick for the number 4. Before I get into why the score is so great, the fact that Avengers Infinity War comes out 2 months after Black Panther, and one of the biggest audience reactions in the entire film is just hearing the drums as we segue from Cap to Wakanda, when he says that line, "I know somewhere." And even before we get a glimpse of Wakanda, people are already reacting to just the drums. Black Panther only came out 2 months before. That says a lot about how memorable and how distinctive the score is, just to start off with. And then, getting into the score itself, it sounds authentically African when it's in Wakanda. Yeah, you don't always, when you see films set in Africa, get scores which sound authentically African, but that's not the case with Black Panther. I think in part because Ludwig Goransson actually went to Africa and did the appropriate research. It comes through in his score. And, just the opening track is called, the second track, even the third track is called Wakanda. It was my favourite track of last year. It's when we first get our proper look at Wakanda, when Okoye and T'Challa and Nakia return. And the lyrics to that track are by Baba Mal, who's a very big deal, especially in South Africa. And they translate to "The elephant is dead, and it is time for the son to be king. Welcome home." And obviously it's perfect metaphor for the film. And that sort of detail is present all the way through the entire score, which, you know, the African segments blends the tribal with the orchestral in a really brilliant way. And then when it comes to the villain, Killmonger, obviously there's a big thread in the film which is about the African and African American divide, and that is also reflected in the music, because whereas all the stuff in Wakanda sounds distinctly African, all the stuff which places an emphasis on Killmonger sounds distinctly African American, with its, you know, trap music and all the rest of it, and the fusion of all those sounds in the entire score is brilliant. And I mean, that's what even to mention the additional things on top of that, like when we go to the ancestral plane, the beauty of that scene and that score is incredible as well. So, you know, I could go on, but it's the best score in the MCU for me, and that is why it's my number 4.
Yeah, I agree entirely with that. I think it's just fantastic. I mean, it's on my list higher up, definitely, and I think there was something about that score. I mean, it obviously, you know, it won the Academy Award this year, but there's something about that score which is genuinely, I think, transformational in terms of what it does for superhero movies and to some extent for film music. You know, some of the things that he's done in there, I don't remember hearing before, in the way he weaved it all together, you know, combining all these different styles from, you know, this African music to, you know, R&B in certain places and stuff like that. And it's a really, really skilled and fantastic achievement, you know. And I mean, I can't even tell you how excited I am to see him develop that in the next film, you know, which obviously hasn't been officially announced, but we all know Black Panther 2 is coming. And it's going to be immense. So I can't wait to see where he takes this now over the next 2 or 3 movies, and then, you know, hopefully, assuming we get more Avengers films, and we'll talk more about this later, but, you know, and we get T'Challa playing a big role, that we get some more of this drip fed into the overall tapestry of the Marvel universe. I mean, I'd love to see this template of an album become part of the weave tapestry of the bigger story, in the way that the Captain America theme and the Avengers theme has been in the first 22 movies, because I think it would be totally fitting.
Absolutely. If you're going to pass the torch with the Avengers scores to someone, I think Ludwig Goransson would be a very worthy composer to do that. I mean, when I first heard the Creed score, which is a couple of years before Black Panther, obviously, that score and that film is one of my favorite films of the last 5 years or so, and that score was a big reason why. So when he signed on to Black Panther, I was very, very excited, and he did not disappoint. Ludwig Goransson now is one of the composers I regularly keep my eye on. I loved his Creed 2 score last year as well. So yeah, I'll be very, very down for an Avengers movie scored by Ludwig.
Oh,
that would just be incredible. And actually, the humble brag alert, I spoke to him about this score last year. Sorry about that. I just thought I'd throw that in.
I know you did.
And he was a delight, and he spoke about what both of you guys have just mentioned, about how the difficulties in fusing the notions of Western music, which is largely built on harmony and melody, with sort of dysrhythmic, sort of polytonal West African music. And he said, how the hell do you bring those two things together? It's very, very, very difficult thing to do, and without making the score seem haphazard and like it's jumping between two different styles at will. And he said that the way that to bring those two things together was the biggest challenge. And I think we all agree he did a magnificent job with it. It's really powerful score and it's brilliant. I was so delighted it got the Oscar. I was like, yes, good. That's like a sea change now, hopefully, in terms of how music for this particular genre of film is hopefully going to be perceived by artistic bodies. But yeah, I think it's a remarkable score. It's so striking. It's really brilliant.
Even though we've had Kings in the MCU before, this is just, the score is so, it just comes across as far more regal than anything else we've seen in the MCU. I guess that's appropriate because T'Challa does act more regal, while Thor, although he is royalty, doesn't really act regal. And as good as the scores have been for the Thor films, I think that's reflected a little bit, especially with Ragnarok, given how humorous the character sort of turns in that movie. That's also reflected in the score.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, Thor's certainly not very regal in Endgame, but we'll get to that.
Oh, we will. Worst king ever. I like him, but come on, man.
Yeah. You mentioned striking, though, Sean. I think that applies to your number 4 choice as well. So why don't you give us that?
It's The Rocketeer by James Horner. And now I know that this isn't... I mean, technically it's a superhero movie, isn't it? I mean, those of you who've seen the film will know that it embraces kind of like pulp comic book stylistics, and it's certainly got that rousing sense of exhilaration. And the movie didn't do very well when it came out in 1991. Funnily enough, it's directed by Joe Johnston, who did the first Avenger. I've only just made that connection. I'm like, oh yeah, Joe Johnston obviously knows how to get great scores out of his composers. And I think this is one of James Horner's finest. I mean, certainly it's got one of his most spectacularly entertaining themes, which is carried on the brass and the high strings, and does that thing that a classic superhero score should do, which it builds the theme in fragments over the course of the movie, and then it fully flourishes when the Rocketeer comes to embrace his destiny, you know, throughout the movie. I mean, the movie is set, it's got this sort of Nazis and sort of espionage, and Howard Hughes is thrown in there as well, so it's got this lovely retro nature. It's a very innocent film. I think quite Spielbergian in a lot of ways, and I don't think that audiences necessarily wanted this at the time. I think people were a little bit confused as to what the movie was trying to do. But you look at James Horner, got it absolutely. He was like, okay, it's not meant to be a score that's going to hold back. It's meant to be full-throated, you know, emotional, sweeping in the way that James Horner loved to do, because James Horner was regularly a composer who could not be accused of holding back. And I think that he found the perfect outlet in this particular movie. I mean, that main theme is just so wonderful. It captures the spirit of flight so fantastically well, and it works so well with the imagery on screen.
Yeah, we talked about this recently, didn't we, when we did the James Horner episode? But yeah, it's a great... I think The Rocketeer is definitely a superhero movie. I think it absolutely counts.
I agree with that. Although I have to say the James Horner score, which sticks in my mind when it comes to superhero scores, and one which I wish was, you know, it deserves more love, but The Mask of Zorro. That score, it's phenomenal, and it's one of many, many honorable mentions, you know, that I have in trying to sort of, you know, whittle my list down to 5. But I listened to the Plaza of Execution, the title track, again, and that is one of the best album openers to any film I've heard. It's just so creative right from the jump, with the tap dancing leading up to the drums, leading up to the theme, and that entire sequence. I mean, I love The Mask of Zorro as a film. You might be you might be getting this from what I'm saying right now. But yeah, that's the James Horner score which I would take over The Rocketeer. That's not to say The Rocketeer isn't good, but I prefer that one.
Yeah, it just shows what an extraordinary career he had. It's so hard to try and pick one above the other, isn't it? Let's just be magnanimous and say they're all fantastic.
Yeah. They're all brilliant. Yeah. And if you want more of an in-depth look at James Horner, go back to our last few episodes, because we get into a lot of the albums there. So there's a shameless callback to some of our previous Between the Notes content. But yeah, okay. Well, my number 4. I've changed this slightly last minute. I was originally going to go for X-Men First Class, sort of linking onto the Henry Jackman thing. Now, I really like that album. I think that's a great album, and the way it, you know, brings in, well, as Henry Jackman said, he wanted to sort of John Barry it a little bit for the modern day, and did a really interesting thing with the X-Men universe. However, I feel a discussion about great superhero movie scores wouldn't be complete without mentioning what could be the best score to the worst superhero movie ever.
Oh, okay, I'm intrigued now.
Which is, well, one of the worst superhero movies ever, John Powell's X-Men 3, The Last Stand. Because I think that's a great score. I think that's in places an absolutely brilliant piece of work to a film which is an absolute dog's dinner. So for years I've loved that, and I think I think some of the stuff he does in there is some of the best stuff from any of the X-Men movies, most of which have been composed by John Ottman, and since a few have been composed by John Ottman. One, obviously, the first one by Michael Kamen, which was great, a great opening score. X-Men 2 has a really good score. To be honest, there hasn't been an X-Men score I've disliked, really, probably. Maybe X-Men Origins Wolverine, but I can't really remember much of that. But, most of them are really good in their own various different composers. But this one, has with tracks like, particularly, things like Dark Phoenix's Tragedy, which is this epic depiction of the moment where Professor X gets killed by Jean Grey. Spoilers, sorry. It has been, 15, 16 years? I think we're safe.
and it's also been unwritten from the X-Men timeline now, so it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They built a whole, entire new series around trying to erase this movie.
I need to be doing the exact same thing again in that.
Well, yeah, we'll see. But and the ending combination of the Battle of the Cure and Phoenix Rises, which is this choral blast of epic proportions. I just love it. I just think it's absolutely brilliant. A brilliant album to a really, really poor film. And I don't know if I think it's one of those that people leave behind a little bit because the film is so rough. I don't know.
I mean, you sold me on wanting to re-listen to the score. I'm not sure if I want to re-watch that film.
Oh God, no! Don't do that to yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I like the X-Men scores. The John Ottman ones in particular, the most recent ones, are really, really good. Not only does it benefit from I wouldn't say unique, but the rare fact that John Ottman is not only the composer, he's also the editor of the movies.
Yeah.
But they have, we were talking about thematic continuity with the MCU for the past few years. The X-Men have been doing that for long before that. With the opening and end titles, both of which are great. And then in the recent movies, there's the Charles Xavier Hope theme, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. And that recurs in both Days of Future Past and Apocalypse, which I really, really like. And I like Henry Jackman's work in First Class as well. Sublift, that track is great. So, the X-Men 3 score is probably the only X-Men score I don't have in my iTunes. But you have, again, successfully sold me on wanting to listen to it again.
Cool. I mean, it's worth going back and having a listen to. It might not... It probably doesn't necessarily have that same feel of continuity that some of these other scores have, to some extent. I think it does sort of stand a little bit distant from it, but I think in this case that works really well. I've got to say, one of the things about the John Ottman stuff and the signature X-Men theme, which is so iconic now, one of the most iconic superhero themes ever, I'll never forget going into Days of Future Past, which I was already super excited about, when it came out, because it was bringing everyone back and everything like this. And then the moment I heard that opening X-Men piece, oh yeah, I was so excited. I remember sitting in the chair with the person I was with going, oh, it's back, because we hadn't had that for First Class, and it had been years before since we'd had an X-Men film. So it's got one of those key, I think, opening motif pieces that I think is just brilliant, really. And I think that, I don't know, did that come from Kamen or did that come from Ottman?
I think that was Ottman, wasn't it? Because
I think it was Ottman, wasn't it?
Kamen's score, apparently he wrote an X-Men score that had loads and loads of themes in it, and then I read that Bryan Singer forced him to basically ditch all the themes and just rewrite it pretty immediately, just as a more atmospheric textural score. And I love what he did with the first X-Men score. I think it was brilliant. But just think what might have been had Michael Kamen been allowed to do.
Yeah.
What you never know. He might have conjured up a whole new theme that was carried through the remainder of the movies. But yeah, I remember exactly when that John Ottman theme came back at the beginning of Days of Future Past. You could feel people like gripping their seats, going, "Okay, we're in a roller coaster kind of ride here." Yeah, it was a great experience.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's my number 4, and I think the X-Men. I'm looking forward to Dark Phoenix score, not so much the film, but the score definitely.
Hans Zimmer, isn't it? Because he's returning. He said he wasn't going to score any more comic book movies, I believe, when Batman v Superman came out, and now he's reneged on his his promise. So that'll be interesting to hear what he does with that.
That didn't last long. What a segue! What a segue into our number 3. This is perfect. It's like we planned this.
I was going to say,
Amon, your number 3 is Zimmertastic, partly, isn't it?
It is. And it's sort of, I'm cheating a little bit here because I've mashed up 2 of the scores. Really, I could go all 3 if I'm being super, super cheating. But basically, the Dark Knight and Batman Begins, for sure, are very much of a piece with one another, and they are my dual number 3. Before I get into the score, properly, I just love the final scene of Batman Begins is great, and I love how really the score in that sequence it really sticks out to me. I think when it comes to ringing, how much can you ring out of 2 notes? When you look at film score history, then obviously the answer to that question is John Williams and Jaws. But the that we get for the Dark Knight trilogy is really, really powerful, and I love how that is, that's a sticking point throughout the entire trilogy, and it's just a great two notes to sort of really announce Batman's arrival, and I really like that. And yeah, the Batman Begins score is a really great foundation that's built on really, really well in The Dark Knight. I love, obviously, Molossus and Batman Begins, which is set to the Batmobile chase, is the most distinctly memorable track of that album. But I think The Dark Knight, like a dog chasing cars, is probably my favorite track in the entire trilogy, and it's not even properly used in the entire film, which is insane. But yeah, that track really is really great. And then obviously when The Dark Knight, you get into the Joker's theme, which is terrifying appropriately and very, very creative in terms of how the very discordant notes that Zimmer employs for that track is really great. And then I think James Newton Howard was the guy who in charge of the Harvey Dent theme, and that has a really nice balance of being both light and dark, which is appropriate for the character as well. So yeah, I really, really like the score, and even now I'm thinking about how I can possibly reorder my list. But right now, as of right now, it's number 3, and I think it's a worthy inclusion.
There is always a moment where, up till this point in these lists, we've been united, all 3 of us, and there's a divergence, isn't there? Although actually,
oh Sean,
because I know me and you, Tony, have spoken before about my ambivalence towards a lot of Hans Zimmer's recent work. I'm of the opinion that Hans Zimmer's best work was from his emergence in the late 80s through to like the late 90s, sort of early 2000s. But actually, they made the excellent point there about comparing the 2 notes with what John Williams did with Jaws. I hadn't thought about it like that before, because that was my criticism of the Dark Knight scores, like the idea of building a character as complex as Batman around 2 notes. But then by you saying that, Amon, I was like, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. I mean, I would say the Dark Knight is the best score out of the 3 films. Yeah, and it is complex. So I think actually you're right. The unsung hero in this is James Newton Howard. He's the one who always gets overlooked. People just see the first 2 scores as just Hans Zimmer scores. It's like, well, no, James Newton Howard is just as important in fashioning the more human, sort of accessible human side to Bruce Wayne. And I think the Harvey Dent theme, the way it builds into that sort of this crescendo of tragedy at the end of The Dark Knight, with that terrifying final sequence at the end, which is extraordinarily dark, is aided and abetted by that theme that has been built up very, very subtly by Newton Howard. I think if Zimmer provides this kind of bombast and the kind of like overwhelming kind of soundscapes, Newton Howard is the one who brings it down to earth in The Dark Knight. And I think that counterbalance is what makes the Dark Knight score work, I think.
I am gonna mention the third one a bit later. Because I do really love the third one, but it's hard to not think The Dark Knight is possibly the best one. You know, so, I mean, I'll just never forget being in the cinema when that came out, and that Why So Serious, that 8-minute Why So Serious theme creeping in with that string that builds. I mean, that was amazing. I remember thinking, oh my, this set the scene so well, because you were thinking, oh my God, this is going to be like a really nerve-shredding experience, this film. And in many ways it was, you know, and that fit the Joker perfectly. And so it's hard to think of a character theme in many ways that best fits a character than that in a long, long time. Certainly a villain, anyway.
Yeah, no, that theme is really, really special. And just insane. You will never hear another villain theme like it. It's so creative. And yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, as you rightfully say, Sean, when you think Zimmer, you think mostly, you know, especially when it comes to this score, bombast. But that's not the word used for the Joker theme. It's very different to anything Zimmer has ever composed. And Zimmer is a composer who, whether it be rightly or wrongly, people have criticized him in the past for making music which sounds similar to some of his other sort of pieces of work. You can't say that about that Joker theme. It's very unique.
Yeah, it is actually. It almost sounds like it's got this buzzing, like wasp-like sound. It's incredibly chilling in the film. Even it's hard to listen to on its own terms. In the film, it works gangbusters. It's really, really good.
No, it is. Yeah, absolutely. So from a great piece of cinema, again, to a less great piece of cinema, I'm afraid, for my number 3, I've gone for what could be the unorthodox choice of Trevor Jones's The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
There's an understatement. I can't believe we've gone from one film to another like that.
Absolutely. Now, a confession time. I don't like the term guilty pleasure, but the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is yeah, it is absolutely a guilty pleasure of mine, that film. Like, I'm aware that it's badly put together and it has a lot of problems. But don't know.
As long as you're aware of it.
I'm aware of that, yeah. But nevertheless, I always enjoy it for whatever reason. I don't quite know why, really. But I've always thought the score for that is really great, and I've always thought that Trevor Jones captured with that film. Again, it was a great score to a less critically, acclaimed movie that really brings out a range of different combinations of mood, of theme, of setting, of place. The Avengers of the Victorian era basically is the LXG, and it has got some beautiful character themes running through. The principal Alan Quatermain arc of this old man at the end of his life on one final adventure, and that too brings in African tribal themes and things like that, because it's not to the great extent of Black Panther or anything like that, but it has some really interesting ideas, and it's quite varied in some of the things it does in the instrumentation, and it captures the varying different characters, because you've got some really different people. Quatermain, you've got Mina Harker, you've got Captain Nemo, and it manages to, I think, bring out those characters through the music and create some really great pieces of work. It's just, again, it's going to be a score that people have probably forgotten, because the film, for most people, is dire. But I'm probably the lone champion. It's not necessarily a hill I will die on, LXG, but, I wouldn't quite die on it. I might take a few injuries, and end up in hospital. But I'm not, But I will champion that film in some ways. But definitely I'll champion the music. And I think, to be honest, if I'm being honest, a major reason I do enjoy the film so much is because of the music, really, because of the score.
Trevor Jones is a thematic master. He's really, really good at like gothic brooding. You think of things like The Dark Crystal or From Hell, but then you think of also his soaring themes from like Cliffhanger and Last of the Mohicans. Actually, he's a composer who doesn't get nearly enough work nowadays, and he was so prominent in like the 80s and 90s. Merlin, I think, is another one that just leapt to mind. But yeah, actually, I really, it's one of the great things about doing these lists is that you can call attention to scores that are fearsomely underrated and that really deserve a lot more exposure. I think this is one of them, without a doubt.
You're very persuasive, Tony.
You are.
Is this the second one that I'm convincing you to go and listen to?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I'm doing well.
Bear in mind, if I'm not feeling these, you will be getting angry messages from me. But Yeah, I've watched The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen a couple of times. There's a couple of sequences which are admittedly fun. But yeah, it is a film which is faded from my memory along with its score. So it is in need of a revisit.
Yeah. Again, you don't have to watch the film. Just listen to the score. It's fine.
Does this allow me to do my Sean Connery impression? Because I know Sean Connery only comes out every now and then.
Any excuse we get, we need to bust out Sean's Connery. So, yeah.
I'm trying to think. There was that quote when they went to the premiere, because Sean Connery and the director Stephen Norrington hated each other on the set, and apparently it was a very fraught production. And Stephen Norrington didn't turn up to the red carpet, and then someone asked Sean Connery, so where's the director? Like, why don't you try the local lunatic asylum? Like that.
I remember that quote. Yeah, try the local asylum. Definitely worth it for Sean's Connery.
Cheers.
But what I have realised is I completely skipped over your number 3, Sean. So let's spiral back before we move on and talk about Avengers. And it wouldn't be a compilation of scores if we didn't have some Jerry Goldsmith in there from you, Sean. So what is your number 3?
Yeah, he is my favourite. And the reason why he's my favourite is because he was the absolute champion of writing magnificent music for absolute dogs of movies. And I think I love that kind of tenacity with Jerry Goldsmith. It didn't matter how awful the movie was. He would attack it with such zeal and such gusto, and would deliver a score for a bad film that would be better than most other composers' career high points. That's how good Jerry Goldsmith was. So yeah, The Shadow, which, I mean, do you guys remember The Shadow from like the early 90s?
Yeah.
I have not seen The Shadow.
I mean, I saw it a while ago. Was it Alec Baldwin?
That's it. Yeah,
I saw it a long time ago, I think.
Yeah, he basically, it's a pulp serial. He's a guy, some kind of opium dealer in Asia who, goes back to New York, and it's sort of, what evil lurks in the hearts of men. He becomes this kind of like perception altering superhero who wears like a trilby with like a bandana over his face, whatever. So it's sort of got 1930s like pulp retro feel, which of course is catnip for somebody like Jerry Goldsmith, who is extraordinary not just at themes but also at immersive quasi-electronic orchestral soundscapes. Jerry Goldsmith fused those two things together better than anybody. And the main theme is brilliant. You hear it in the opening track, the poppy fields. It gets like an opening credits arrangement, which has got this kind of, I don't quite know how to describe it without sounding like crass. It's got this like electronic kind of whoosh sound in between the trumpets and the strings. It's almost like it's carrying you from like one comic book panel to another. So you get this palpable sense of movement and also mystery and intrigue. And that, I mean, it's a score that relies a lot on the input of that theme. That theme gets some incredibly bold statements all the way through it, but there are other lovely touches. There's like a love theme in there as well. There are allusions to this kind of 1930s kind of jazzy context, but really, and then also there's a theme for the villain, who I believe was Genghis Khan. So it brings out all like the stick, the stick percussion, and it builds these incredibly like thunderous like sort of levels. But typical Jerry Goldsmith, it's not unlistenable. It's built around such a clear understanding of rhythm and melody that the score is just an absolute delight to listen to. And what a shame that, as with a lot of Goldsmith stuff, his magnificent score was attached to a film that kind of sunk without a trace. I think that's why I love Jerry Goldsmith. Like, no matter what the overall ambitions of the movie were, he would just look beyond that and go, you know what, I'm going to tackle this as if it was the best film in the world, even though very often it wasn't.
And I again, this is my turn to actually say that I need to go back and listen to this one, because it's been a long, long time. But, you're always going to get quality from Goldsmith, aren't you? It's like you say, even for poorer movies, he's gonna pull something exciting out the bag. So, yeah, I will dig this one out again.
Ditto.
Yeah.
This is it. We're just that is the beauty of this. Just finding out all these old gems. But we've got a new gem now we're going to talk about. So let's. We've made you wait long enough, guys. Like, Kevin Feige and the MCU have made you wait long enough for Endgame. We're now going to talk about the Alan Silvestri brand new score to Avengers Endgame, Whatever It Takes. So, before we talk about this, I think we should really just preface this, and we talked about this before the podcast, with a massive big spoiler klaxon warning here, because we can't really talk about this music without really discussing some key aspects from the movie, which we've all seen now, which has been out, as we record, it's been out about 4 days, and this episode will probably be going out around a week since the film was released, and we're conscious of the fact that a lot of you listening will probably have seen Avengers Endgame by now, but we're aware that some of you might not have. So, if I'm honest, if you haven't seen it, I would recommend either pausing the podcast now and watching it, or skipping ahead to our final, superhero discussion bit, and then coming back to this later, because we are gonna spoil you on the fact that Captain America dies. Oops, what have I said?
That's mean.
Sorry. Sorry.
How could you?
Yeah.
Big spoiler warning, guys. All right, just be mindful of that. So let's kick it off then. Avengers Endgame, which is the culmination of the MCU's first 22 movies. Alan Silvestri, of course, scored Avengers, which we've talked about earlier, Avengers Assemble, if you like. And he scored Avengers Infinity War last year, which was the big lead-in. And, of course, Thanos clicked his fingers, the universe went pop, or half the universe went pop. And our superheroes were in a bit of a sticky wicket, but now they're coming back together and fighting back. So, Sean, let's start with you then. What did you think of this? Was this the superhero score to end them all for Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it was. I think the interesting thing is that when the Infinity War score came out, I think a lot of people criticised it because people expected this kind of canvas of like multiple character themes from across the Marvel Cinematic Universe. People expected a lot of that musical history to be threaded together, and in fact that score was actually very dark. It was dominated largely by the one theme, by Thanos' theme, which was very toiling and brooding. It also very tragic, because the way that Josh Brolin brilliantly plays it is that Thanos experiences a lot of loss in seeking the Infinity Stones and obliterating half the universe, and Silvestri got that brilliantly. And I think it's important to note that these two scores, as with the two films, are, they're two halves of the Infinity Saga. So you've got the first half, which is dark and stares death in the face, and it's all about destruction, whereas Endgame, in terms of the film and also the score, it is more liberated. I think that after all that death and destruction, what you now get is a much greater variety of mood and tone and nuance as we anticipate the close of this particular saga. And I think, Silvestri, you can quite clearly hear how much in contrast to Infinity War, how much he's liberated in the Endgame score, the amount of different tones that he strikes. I know we were talking about this on Twitter, just trying to tot up the sheer amount of character themes, not all of which appear on the album, interestingly enough. A lot of pre-existing character themes like Doctor Strange, Ant-Man, Captain Marvel appear in the film, but they're not on the album. But and that's brilliant, hearing all that. But apart from that, you get callbacks to the scores for, as we've said earlier, from Avengers Assemble and the First Avenger, also the Porch track from Infinity War. There's a new theme, which I'm struggling to describe this, maybe like the Hope theme, which is basically about the unity of the Avengers and how that theme increases in stature towards the death of Tony Stark at the end, and that theme becomes a celebration of Tony Stark's legacy. That's one of the most beautiful themes that Silvestri has come up with in a very long time. It reminded me a lot of kind of Castaway in its quieter moments. But the really, and of course, it goes without saying that Alan Silvestri is the action master, and the orchestral onslaught that he unleashes during the action sequences is so redolent of Back to the Future and Predator. And I love the fact that his style has been maintained for the best part of nearly 40 years now. But it was the comic moments that really stood out, like the light sort of jazz comic moments, which really do help vary up the tone of the score brilliantly. And it goes into that kind of playful time heist feel, and you can quite clearly see that he's feeding off a script that is having a lot of fun replaying earlier scenes from the MCU from a different perspective. And there were scenes that reminded me of his scores for like Mouse Hunt, which I love. I think that score is brilliant. And also at Soap Dish, which I think also had Robert Downey Jr. in it, if I'm not mistaken. I think this is a fantastic score. I think it's really powerful. I think it's more varied than the Infinity War score by necessity, and I think that you get you get a grandeur and you get weight from it. You do genuinely get a sense that Silvestri understands the culmination of 11 years worth of this franchise, and he concludes it in the most emotive and powerful way possible. Yeah, I loved it to bits.
Ditto. No, I'll go into more detail. Sean is 1,000% right. I completely agree with everything he just said. I started off this podcast speaking about tracks which make you visualize and put you in the mindset of where you were when you first watched certain scenes. And there's a lot of good stuff all the way through the entire score, all the way through the movie, but really everything the movie is building up to this track called Portals, which plays when all of the dusted heroes return, and it sort of says into the most bombastic rendition of the Avengers theme we've ever gotten, into a very, very well-known catchphrase which we've wanted to hear on screen for a very long time, which we finally do. And, you know, I'm going to be doing sort of many sort of, you know, podcasts and doing a lot of writing on Avengers Endgame, and there's definitely valid criticisms of the film to be had. But I am very, very appreciative and consider myself very, very lucky to have spent my adult life growing up with this cinematic universe. And watching this for the first time, watching that scene for the first time, was a very special, memorable experience that was amplified 1,000-fold because of Alan Silvestri's score. So, you know, before I get into the score itself, I think that was just, you know, it might sound cheesy, but I wanted to say that because, yeah, I'm very, very appreciative. And I consider myself very, very lucky to have experienced that. Because it's just awesome. And, you know, every time, I mean, the score's been practically on repeat the last couple of days. And Portals, the play count on that track in particular is rising rapidly, because it just makes me think of that scene and gives me goosebumps, and it's incredible. But yeah, the theme, I mean, you're definitely right, Sean, in saying that Silvestri is liberated with this film, because really Infinity War was Thanos' movie. Endgame is more devoted to the heroes, and, you know, that's definitely reflected in the score. I loved, you know, all the callbacks. I love that we get so many hints of the Avengers themes, or the Avengers theme in multiple tracks throughout the score. You know, I think there's a track called In Plain Sight, which sort of has a bit of the musical style of the of Christoph Beck's Ant-Man work, alongside sort of a jazzy rendition of the Avengers theme, or jazzy hints to the Avengers theme and stuff like that. I love what he does with the Captain America score, because in the early sort of part of the score and in the film, everything is quite dark and somber. The first time we hear the Captain America theme is really when, honestly, you hear that theme and it's like, it's instant hope. And that comes across in both the track and the film, which I love. I love when Sam Wilson sort of, you know, accepts the mantle of Captain America, which is a fantastic moment, and one which I'm writing about for Empire right now, as I said. But I love that the Captain America theme rendition we get in that moment is both familiar and has a slightly different, richer twang to it. I think the track is called Go Ahead. It's in the back half of that track. I highly recommend listening to that. It's really, really good, and I'm very excited to see Sam Wilson's journey as Cap in future MCU movies. And I'll be very interested to see who ends up scoring that, and if they reuse Silvestri's work. But yeah, this is, you know, easily the most emotional, poignant score in the MCU, as it should be, and I loved it.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you've said. I mean, I it's funny. I've been listening to Infinity War a bit more lately, and because I've watched it a couple of times, and I remember not being overwhelmed by that. I loved the Thanos theme. I loved the absolute power and intensity and, you know, doom laden aspect of that. What he did with that. But I remember feeling like the score didn't really hit me. But the more I've listened back to the last few tracks of Infinity War, particularly the track in which it goes with Thor putting the axe into Thanos' chest, it just builds this cataclysmic refrain before the snap happens. And there is some really good stuff in there, but it's not which I didn't realise at first, but it's not as rousing as Endgame for obvious reasons. He couldn't do that at the end of Infinity War because they lose, So it has to be a very different thing. But this just brings everything to such a beautiful point, And then I think portals. I think you said it. I think you either said at the beginning of this podcast, Amon, or before we recorded, that watching this film and not having listened to the music beforehand is so essential in many ways, because I remember watching the film, and at the point where Portals kicks in, it's the point where Cap is on his own. It looks like they're going to lose because Thanos is there, powerful. He's about to unleash an army on just Cap, basically. And you get that incredible shot of Cap on this massive battlefield facing like the legions of hell. And it's this amazing, could be a hanging in the National Gallery. That it's just incredible. And then you get the portal open. T'Challa walks through with Shuri and
Okoye.
What's her name? Okoye, thank you.
And you get those drum beats in the background, which Silvestri accentuates that so brilliantly.
Right, and it just builds up to this incredible moment, and the emotion that I felt.
Gosh.
not just for what I was seeing on the screen, which was this wonderful, rousing moment of, this is it, this is what we've been waiting for. But the music absolutely brought that to life in a way that is hard to express. But I mean, it works anyway separately. When you listen to the album, and like you guys, I've been listening to it on rotation a bit. When you listen to it without the movie, it still works. But when you're watching it with the film, I mean, it's just astonishingly well done. It really builds to a point where it honours everything that Silvestri was doing before. It honours the MCU, and I just love that. I love the way it all comes together at the end. And then you've also, as you say, you've also got the elegy for Tony. Really, I think it might be called The Real Hero.
Yes.
On the track,
gosh, so much.
Which is, oh my god! I think the bit that really made me cry in the film was when, at the end of the funeral, when Happy talks to his little daughter,
Morgan,
about the cheeseburgers, and Jon Favreau's just in bits, and I just and Silvestri at that point brings this one note in there that is just heartbreaking, and I was just a mess both times I've seen the film.
No, that track is, I mean, it's so beautiful, and it's incredible in that we get like 3 different versions of that theme in that track, and each one of them is poignant and beautiful and emotional. Yeah. Whether it's piano, whether it's epic strings, whether it's just stirring strings, every single one of them works. It's just a beautiful piece of music.
There's also a lovely kind of. I saw the film again just recently. I've seen it twice now, and it's because it's so rich, isn't it? You kind of have to do it. But the mirroring of the music is very, very clever, because at the very beginning of the movie, when Tony and Nebula are in space before they get rescued by Captain Marvel, there's a kind of almost like a vibraphone. There's a kind of sustained note in the background during that scene when Tony goes to sleep on the ship at the beginning before Captain Marvel turns up. That same tone is reprised in the funeral scene at the end when Pepper comes out and puts the arc reactor on the reef. You hear that same kind of vibraphone. I'm assuming it's a vibraphone. I might be wrong about that. It's got a kind of eerie, kind of ghostly presence, and I think the nuance in the score, the attention to where the characters are at certain points and how Silvestri anticipates what's going to happen through the music it's a sign of his extraordinary stature as a composer. The fact that there is that attention to detail, yet there is also the grand scale sort of grandiose action sequences as well.
I was also just going to mention, because I can really feel myself forgetting this, but there's a great twist on the Avengers title card theme.
Yes.
Which I really, really loved. I think it's track number 3 on the score, No Trust, the final to the 20-30 seconds. And it just bangs. It works. I love it.
Yeah.
But, there's so much to talk about in this score. It's a lot, but
it's the end as well. I mean, the parts of Portals and some of the other stuff carries through to that glorious final track, Main on End, which is the rousing, goodbye to all these
where
characters.
You see their
the
autographs on the screen.
Well, it's very Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country, that, isn't it? Yeah. At the very end, where
it's interesting because, I've been talking to a couple of people obviously about this film, and one of the people I was talking to was having a problem with sort of that scene and the signatures. I'm like, this is 11 years and 22 movies. Marvel have earned the right to flex.
Yeah, exactly.
They have.
And that was, it worked for me. I was applauding. I mean, that's the last time I'm probably going to see Robert Downey Jr. play this character. Without him, possibly none of this would have come to pass. And, as I said, there's a lot of memorable cinematic experiences I can tie to the MCU. So they fully deserved and earned that. And it worked for me, for sure. It's a great track.
But it's a great build of everything, of all these Avengers themes, of the various escalation of it, and it's so moving and rousing and definitive. I think what I thought was really impressive was how the album really does feel like a capstone for like the film feels like a capstone, and I think to actually be able to do that with a piece of music and actually tie off. I know a lot of threads are going to carry on into the next era of Marvel, but to actually tie off that, and because I've said this before, I don't think you're ever going to get a film quite like Endgame again, in a way, in terms of what they do in that film. I don't think Marvel will ever repeat that trick again, because I don't think they can.
No, and I think it's got 11 years worth of history behind it, and you're going to have to wait for another decade before you get another comparative experience like that. Surely,
yeah. And even if we do get another decade of Marvel films that build up, it's going to be a very different kind of story and a very different kind of plan and an execution. So you won't get a similar score at the end of it, whether it's Silvestri or Ludwig Goransson.
I don't think even if Marvel succeed in building another 10, I don't think anything will compare to watching this again in terms of the superhero genre. It just won't. There's not many times watching a film that you can almost sense you're watching cinematic history play out. This was one of those times. That scene we're talking about, which was soundtracked by Portals, and in which the entire catalog of MCU heroes charge against the forces of evil for the fate of the universe. That's not going to happen again.
Yeah,
it's true.
And
it's not.
It's just. It's insane. It's insane because even if Marvel gets somewhere close to that, there's a special stature that's going to have because it was the first sort of series to. It was the first thing to do it. Like nobody's ever really done it to that extent before and done it that well and executed it in such a. It's not going to happen again. So yeah, again, just watching that film for the first time was special.
I mean, that in that scene in particular, particularly with Silvestri's music, I was reminded of the grandeur of the closing battle sequences from Return of the King, Lord of the Rings, and I kind absolutely. Of like those once in a generational fusions of visuals and music and performances, which like blow you back in your seat. And like you're right, you say, I'm going to remember watching this for the first time. I was there, listening to that music, watching all these characters enter the final the biggest battle of their lives, and how monumental that is and how moving that is. I mean, for me as well, it's kind of like never ever let it be said from now, particularly that the MCU does not have memorable music in it. I mean, I think people have kind of gone on the turn with that. I don't think people would say that anymore, but people used to say it. But I think
I know, and it bugged the hell out of me for years. Gosh, it was so annoying when that essay came out on YouTube and everyone shared it and it went viral. I'm like, I listen to the MCU scores all the time.
Yeah.
I have every single one of them on my iTunes. I mean, as I've said many times before, my issue with with prior MCU scores is not that they're not memorable, because if you listen to them, especially if you listen to them on their own, they are. But it's that they get lost in the edit, in the mix, far too often.
Yeah.
And a track I used to sort of illustrate this is in the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 score, which is doubly overshadowed by the fact that it has the awesome mix Volume 1s and Volume 2, which is both of which are great. But Tyler Bates' scores for those films are legitimately great. And there's a track called Two Time Galaxy Savers, which has, in my mind, to date, probably the best rendition of the Guardians theme. And you can barely hear it in the film, in the sequence which is playing in, which just, underlines that problem. Thankfully, in both Infinity War and Endgame, the Russo brothers and Silvestri have worked together and have seen fit to give Silvestri's music prime placement. There are multiple sequences in both movies where really it's just the score, and not only sort of multiple sequences, multiple important sequences in which the score is given absolute prime placement and is driving what you're seeing on screen. I'm not just talking about portals. I'm talking about in Infinity War where Thanos comes to Wakanda and he's on the warpath and he's trying to get to Scarlet Witch and Vision. That's just the score, and it works so well. It's so powerful and stirring. And there are multiple sequences like that in which the score is given prime placement, and that is why those sequences are all the more memorable for them.
Absolutely, and it's better than I honestly thought it would be. And I thought this would be a stronger piece of work than Infinity War, or a more resonant piece of work than Infinity War. But I was really happy to enjoy it with the movie and then go and listen to it independently and think, oh, he's done it. He's done it. And we shouldn't have had any doubt, really. It is Alan Silvestri.
He's one of the greats. He has been so underrated for such a long time. And I'm one of the things that's been delightful about this film is seeing how much recognition he's got. You can always tell when a film score works when it permeates through social media and when apparently casual fans of movies like this start talking about music and start tweeting out tracks, and you think, brilliant. this is great. Yeah. It's vindication for a composer who has delivered such extraordinary work for such a long time now, going right the way back to Romancing the Stone and Back to the Future, and even before that with things like Chips, TV work. And I mean, Alan Silvestri is one of those figures who he kind of wrote the sound of my childhood. Really, I said this about James Horner on our earlier podcast, but Alan Silvestri, I mean, things like Back to the Future, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, The Abyss, Forrest Gump, Volcano, and his just litany of work is just absolutely outstanding, and I'm delighted, as has been quite rightly pointed out, that give full credit to the Russo brothers as well. The Russos tweeted out a shot when they completed recording on the score, and you could quite clearly see how utterly thrilled they were to work with him. They recognise Silvestri's musical skill, and I love the fact when directors quite clearly acknowledge the power that a composer can wield over their movie, and as has been quite rightly said, they allow him to carry the drama at certain points because Silvestri can do that magnificently well. Yeah, it's quite poignant, actually. I think, I love seeing that vindication for somebody who's been in the industry for such a long time.
Do we think this is going to be in any top tens of the year, score-wise?
Oh, yeah.
My top 10. That's for sure. And that's the only top 10 that matters. Let's be honest now, Joe.
Well, exactly.
But it definitely deserves to be. I say this as, we still got 8 months of films coming up, but when it comes to the reason which I stated at the start of this podcast, and me being such a big fan of the superhero genre and of this MCU in particular, the music and my reactions to the music and what I felt when watching it for the first time, all of that's going to stay with me for a very, very long time. So yeah, I think it will be in end of year list for sure.
It's a belter. So. Yeah, hopefully if you're listening to this, you've watched the movie and you've listened to the score. So yeah, we hope you enjoy it, really. But yeah. All right then. So top two superhero top 5 scores. Then let's finish this off. This I suppose will be a bit of a shorter discussion because there's a bit of overlap. So for that reason, I think I'm going to start us off with this one because I think we can kind of talk about the number 2 and number 1 places sort of at the same time because there's a bit of shared stuff. My number 2 is The Dark Knight Rises by Hans Zimmer. Now, obviously, we talked about Batman Begins and The Dark Knight beforehand, which featured Hans Zimmer. And this is the culmination of the Christopher Nolan trilogy. And it's probably the one film of the 3 that really gets the most divisive, I would say. And I would venture that maybe the score is the same.
Whatever would make you think that.
I know. Who knows? Because obviously this score is a little bit different from the previous two. You know, it carries through a lot of the same kind of ideas that Zimmer in his contribution to the first two scores, because obviously, as we said, he did them with James Newton Howard. Carries through a lot of that stuff, but it builds everything to use that word Sean used earlier, that level of bombast and that level of scale, which The Dark Knight Rises has. And it was funny, I was talking at my wife, which tends to be what I do, about, bless her, because she has to listen to me. She's a great conversationalist with this stuff, but quite often she has to listen to me. And I was talking about how, in many ways, there feel like similarities between Thanos and Bane in terms of characters, and in terms of 7 years ago, The Dark Knight Rises had sort of a sense of climactic scale that even in terms of, you know, actual plot and the cosmic nature of Endgame, it's not even close to that. But in terms of anticipation and stakes, The Dark Knight Rises was enormous, and in some ways still feels enormous within the context of that trilogy. And for me, the score has always kind of matched up to that, you know, and has the really interesting inflections of the chant, you know, the choral chant, the pasara pasara desh stuff, which came out for me really. I loved in Gotham's Reckoning, which is the opening track where Bane is sort of introduced. And I've played that so many times, and it's got some other great, powerful tracks like Imagine the Fire and Rise that just really, you know, escalate the music to such a crescendo. I love this. It is my favourite. I think, like we said, I think The Dark Knight is probably the richest and most powerful soundtrack in many ways in terms of what it can do and the strength of it. But I think score-wise, The Dark Knight Rises is my favourite of the Nolan trilogy, and I think it always will be. And so's the film. Sorry.
Whoa! See, I was with you until that last line.
But you know what? Right? Honestly, I know critically, The Dark Knight is the strongest of the three. Right? I do. I really do appreciate that. But I just love The Dark Knight Rises. I don't know why. I just do.
I love the score. I mean, we were talking just ago about the Endgame score and the sense of finality it had to it. That same sense of finality is here for the Dark Knight Rises score, and I really, really love that. I love the grandeur of certain tracks that we've heard in sort of the Dark Knight and Batman Begins, which are elevated and escalated to an even more bombastic degree. When I'm talking about that, I think especially of Why Do We Fall, and that track and where it's played in the film is a very rousing moment, which I will remember watching for the first time for the rest of my days as well. That track and that scene is utterly phenomenal, and the music is definitely rises to the occasion on that. You mentioned Imagine the Fire, fantastic track, and I love how as the score goes on, it blends Bane's chants with more of the orchestral music, and I think that fusion works really, really well too.
Sean, what about you? I mean, you're unsure. You're not the biggest Zimmer fan, as we said. Do you get anything out of this one?
I mean, I hate to be the Thanos in this situation, but I'm going to be.
Are you inevitable?
Yeah. You guys are going to form like a sort of flanking position, and then I'm going to be like sort of on the other side. I think my problem with this is that I think Zimmer mistakes grandiose. He mistakes overblown noisy for epic. I think that for me, as it is often a problem with me with music in Christopher Nolan's movies, the score is very, very noisy, and I think even in the context of the movie, the way the music is mixed is infuriatingly loud. I mean, we talked about how in the MCU scores are very often underplayed in the same mix. This is overplayed to a massive degree, to the extent that I was often struggling to hear what the characters were actually saying to each other, which is kind of You know, it's kind of an aggravating thing. And there's a lot of dialogue. This being a Christopher Nolan movie, the characters are constantly explaining what's going on. And I'm like, Hans, just dial it down a little bit. You know, less of the drums, less of the chanting. You know, just. I mean, a lot of that goes to Christopher Nolan as well. I just think that there's a brilliant reviewer called James Southall. I'm sure you guys know of him on moviewave.net.
Yeah.
Brilliant journalist. One of the best in the business. He said it's not a score that's written in shades of grey so much as shades of dark. It's just it all pretty much sounds the same. And I know there are individual interesting elements in it. I mean, I find it very hard to take the I apologise in advance for what I'm about to do here. I find it very hard to listen to that choral, I think, Sanskrit theme now without thinking of what someone on YouTube pointed out, which is it sounds like a group of people chanting fishy pasta over and over and over. and again, I'm sorry for that because I've probably just ruined that for both of you like that.
Cheers, Sean.
But that's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like. You go listen to it. It's like a group of people going fishy pasta, like that. And it's kind of like, and it really doesn't help that the movie takes itself very, very seriously, as a lot of Christopher Nolan movies do, and the kind of overblown nature of the music with that problem, and the slightly overblown. It's not my favourite Christopher Nolan Batman film. Again, I think The Dark Knight is the masterpiece here. It really doesn't help the situation at all. So yeah, I think there are. I'm not going to completely denigrate it. It's Hans Zimmer. You know, and I am a Hans Zimmer fan. I'm not against Hans Zimmer at all, but I'm not a fan when he's in this kind of mode, generally speaking. Sorry about that.
I'm getting the sense that you are a massive Christopher Nolan fan. That's what's coming across me most here.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned there that there are times when you couldn't hear what was being said. I have had that problem with Christopher Nolan movies before, most notably in Interstellar, which is just, I think, honest trailers, sometimes I love them, sometimes I hate them, but they did have a good line when they're doing Interstellar, and I think it said something like, it feels like Hans Zimmer fell asleep on his organ. But with this one, I didn't get that. I mean, I should say I'm someone who absolutely loves the Bane voice. So, you know, I'm getting the sense that that's not you.
I mean, but no, I won't do that.
So yeah, no.
Is that Sean Connery again?
I think it was.
No.
Well, moving on to the next show, I'm going to talk about...
Oh, sorry. I thought I was going to do the podcast in Bane. But yeah, fair enough. All fair points. It's worth revisiting either way, I think. But let's talk about your number twos. And I'm saying this because you both have gone for the same number two and number one. Completely understandably, if I'm honest. So we'll do this as a joint. We'll do the next two as a joint number two and a joint number one for you guys. So your number twos for both of you is Danny Elfman's Batman. So who wants to kick us off with this? Because this is the Tim Burton 1989 movie, which kind of was probably what in many ways the film that sort of kicked off the next phase of the superhero movie in many ways. So who wants to start us off as to why this is your number two?
You go, mate. You go first.
I was going to say you go first because I have like the Shirley Walker of it all to talk about. So
okay, okay. I'll kick us off then. Well, just purely, I mean, if you're talking about John Williams' Superman as like the grandfather of the superhero movie score, I mean, Danny Elfman's Batman is the godfather. Probably it's in terms of the tone that it sets. And I mean, obviously, being attached to what was then the most commercially successful superhero movie of all time. I mean, Tim Burton established a template with the movie, and Danny Elfman established a template with the score. So, in terms of its importance as a score, that cannot be underestimated. But of course, that wouldn't matter if the music wasn't utterly spectacular, and it is. It's extraordinary to think that Danny Elfman hadn't actually been scoring movies that much up to this point. This was 1989. He only came on to scoring films in the mid-80s. He came out of Oingo Boingo. He wasn't classically trained, and you listen to this with its clearly drawing on his love of like Bernard Herrmann, and it's got these extraordinarily rich kind of gothic orchestral choral soundscapes which mirrored Tim Burton's visual aesthetics so brilliantly. And of course, you've got that Batman theme, which it does what a Batman theme is meant to do. It's a theme. It takes you on a journey. It tells you what the character is. It's dark and brooding, yet it's also unashamedly heroic and rousing. It gets the duality of the character brilliantly well, and this is obviously reprised in Batman Returns as well. And just the sheer variety of tones. I mean, the fact that Danny Elfman pitches the score at a very, very difficult level, it takes itself seriously enough, yet it's also very tongue-in-cheek and camp. It walks that tightrope very, very well, as Tim Burton does in the movie. You got the Joker's theme, which is just, this insanely sort of florid waltz, where it just gets Jack Nicholson's portrayal of the Joker brilliantly. But you just think of the tracks like Up the Cathedral, which is basically like a sort of ode to what an organ can do in a film. It's like a full-on Hammer horror kind of pastiche, and just the sophistication of the score continues to blow my mind. I mean, this was the score had a clear influence on Jerry Goldsmith's score for The Shadow, as I mentioned earlier, and pretty much every superhero score that came in its wake, in terms of the darkness of it, yet also the listenability of it. The fact that it's dark, yet it's also kind of self-aware, humorous kind of dark that's laced with a sense of triumph and heroism as well. It's not an easy thing to pull off. And I think, for me, Danny Elfman is the sound of Batman. I don't accept any other substitutes, frankly. I
mean, I don't disagree with that, but I think when you're talking about Danny Elfman, you also have to mention Shirley Walker too, because she worked as an orchestrator on with him on that score. And obviously, when I say Shirley Walker, if you don't know who that is, and you should, she's the person who's in charge of doing the music for Batman with the Batman animated series, which I grew up with, and obviously that was carried over into the Justice League animated series, and is even still used to this day. There's been a recent animated film released, Justice League versus the Fatal Five, and that Batman theme is reprised, and obviously it bears some similarities to what Danny Elfman did, but when I think of Shirley Walker, I also think of Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which for me is still to this day the best Batman movie of all time. And what she does with the Batman theme in that movie is sensational. The opening sort of track, the main title, is sort of a choral version of the Batman theme, which is really, really amazing and atmospheric. And there are multiple tracks in that score which really stand out. The birth of Batman especially is really incredible, and a very dark, an even darker somehow version of that iconic score. So yeah, as good as as we've said, the Hans Zimmer and James Newton Howard work in the Dark Knight trilogy is, this is definitely the quintessential Batman theme, and I don't think that's going to change ever.
Yeah, it's also, a really good point when you shout out towards the orchestrators, because obviously Danny Elfman, being at that point in his career relatively inexperienced, he would be reliant, presumably, on the orchestrators like Shirley Walker to develop that kind of melodic, harmonic complexity that makes the scores so memorable, I suppose.
I can't disagree. I mean, the only reason that this and your number one is not in my top five was because I wanted to throw a few different possibilities in there. I think it would absolutely be in my top five. It is fantastic, and it is iconic, and it is one of the most recognisable themes ever.
I was so shocked that I looked at your top five. I was like, what?
I know. Like I say, I know. Only because, to throw a few other choices in there, this absolutely would be in there. 100%. It's fantastic.
I'm glad you clarified that. You're not as insane as I thought you were.
No, good. Only partially insane. But my number one, we've already talked about, and this is my number one regardless of the fact I've added a few extra things in. I love this. It has immediately become my number one superhero score ever. I really, really believe this. Black Panther, we've talked about it. I mean, much as obviously the top two we're talking about are phenomenal, I don't know. I can't. I've listened to Black Panther more, I think, than any other superhero score ever, even in just over a year, which is remarkable, really. So we've talked about that. We've talked about why it's a masterpiece. So let's move on and talk about the big one. And this is hard to dispute by any stretch of the imagination. Your joint number one is John Williams' Superman from 1978. I mean, again, it almost needs no introduction, really. But Amon, why don't you kick us off with this time? And actually, why is this the greatest superhero movie score ever?
Because it's the standard by which all other superhero scores are measured. I think it's just, I used the word quintessential for Batman. Quintessential also applies here. That opening fanfare is something which is just instantly iconic. And, iconic is a phrase that gets bandied about probably too much these days, but it is very much the word that you apply here. And, obviously, that's mostly, when we think of this theme, we rightly so think of the opening fanfare, but there are a ton of other really good musical cues all the way through. The love theme especially stands out as well, and I could go on. But yeah, this theme is just incredible, and, back in the day before really any of this, the superhero movie boom had begun, to fashion a theme which is so clearly heroic and memorable and has that sense of gravitas is incredible. And it's the reason why, it's one of many reasons why John Williams, I'm a fan of many composers, and for me, Hans Zimmer was the one who sort of opened my ears to film music, and he will always have a special place in my heart because of that. But Hans Zimmer is a distant number two to John Williams, and everybody is very, very distant. John Williams is the greatest composer of all time, and this is just one of many examples you can point to illustrate that fact.
Yeah, nailed it. I don't really have much more to add to that. This is one of those scores where its reputation precedes it, and upon hearing it, you completely understand why, and you completely understand John Williams's astonishing ability to get beneath the skin of a particular film and character and to give them a soul and an identity. And there is a reason why John Williams is as revered as that, because he is not only an extraordinary musician, he's also an extraordinary dramatist. He can see the emotional core of a given property, and he can fashion something that is so kind of singularly identified with that character, with that scene, with that scenario, whatever. And I think the ability to write a great melody I think that's something that's very underrated. I think a lot of people probably assume that that's quite easy, but the ability to put a series of notes together that will permeate into popular culture and that people will remember, 40 years on, that's not an easy thing to accomplish. And John Williams is the master at that, but he doesn't use that as a crutch. As you said, that there are the incidental music around the theme, the Love Theme, the Can You Read My Mind theme, the way that he uses the Superman theme in different contexts, the Krypton theme at the start, which is quite electronic and I think and strange. Yeah, words cannot express how astonishing John Williams is. Even more astonishing that he was Oscar nominated for this but didn't win, and yet Ludwig Goransson did for Black Panther. Again, I made this point when Black Panther won the Oscar. I was like, wow, it's like not even the Superman score won the Oscar, and as you said, it's the one that set the template.
What I need to see what got the Oscar instead, because to not award this an Oscar, you have to be outside of your mind.
I think it was Midnight Express by Giorgio Moroder. I might have to check that. We talked about this before, haven't we, Tony?
We did.
Okay, but yeah, and then I just gone to the John Williams Wikipedia page because I wanted to get this right. But in this span, so 1977, Star Wars, 1978, Superman, 1981, Raiders of the Lost Ark, 1982, E.T. This is over a 5-year period.
It's amazing.
It's just,
it's remarkable.
He's the GOAT. I can't put any simpler than that.
Yeah, and there's a brilliant thing that I think this is credited to J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams said of John Williams, John behaves like somebody who hasn't read his own resume. It's like he's so humble and so utterly committed to the craft. It's not about ego, and I think with film music, and this obviously extends to like comic book film music as well, the composer has to completely suppress their own ego in favour of what does the story require, what is it about this, in this case Superman, what is it about this, the iconography of this character that is going to inform the music. It's not just about what I think as a composer what he wants, what does the character signify and what does the director want. And clearly that fusion with Richard Donner for Superman came together so brilliantly. I mean, it is the Superman theme. I know a lot of people will stand up for what Hans Zimmer did in the recent sort of DC Extended Universe movies, but no, it's John Williams without a doubt.
I don't know if there's a greater character theme that's ever been written than that. Even with the masterpieces that Williams himself has done, things like Indiana Jones, which is equally as memorable. I don't know. I think that Superman theme is incredible. I mean, incredible to the point that it fits what that film is and what that character is so astonishingly well. You can't quite believe it.
Yeah, and if you see it performed live, and you see, again, this is the word that's been threaded all through this podcast, like Pavlovian sort of effect, particularly on like younger people, because when you go to like film music concerts, you get a massive spread of ages in a way that's really quite surprising, like old people, young people, and if there are like kids there, and I've seen this theme played live several times now, and it only gets more and more powerful every single time. You see the reaction of kids who presumably might not have heard it at all, or might only have heard it once or twice, and the palpable physical reaction that it engenders. You see kids getting up out of their seat, like air conducting along to it. You can't. It's just this kind of alchemical thing. I don't know how to describe it.
It's just insane, and I would not be surprised if it still gets that reaction in another 40 years, and another 40 years after that. And it's just, I mean, there's not enough you can say about it to really do it justice. I
think people will, if the world lasts that long and we've still got the music that long, I think people will be talking about and listening to John Williams in the same way that people do Beethoven, Mozart.
Yeah.
Now I think his music is going to last forever. I think it will be one of those things, one of those pieces of music that people talk about 300, 400, 500 years down the line. And things like Superman, because they are, that there is no doubt that, that built-in snobbery about film music that was there for a long time, and he's starting to really dissipate a lot more these days. You don't really get that as much now. There's a lot more appreciation of the art form of it. But how you can really say that isn't among some of the greatest classical music ever written, I don't know. I don't know how you could possibly argue that, because it is. Yeah. It transcends the art form, and like you said, Amon, it set the template for so much that followed it. As he did with most of his movies, the most impressive, powerful scores. Yeah, everyone's just in his wake really now, in many ways.
Yes, obviously this is the quintessential Superman theme and everything we just said, but I really do like the work that Hans Zimmer did for Man of Steel, and it's a shame.
Yeah, me too, actually.
It's a shame that whether it was Joss Whedon or Zack Snyder, in the end, that they didn't see fit to have faith in it and use that theme instead of the John Williams Superman theme in Justice League. I'm in two minds of it, because obviously the theme is incredible, but I really liked what they did with Man of Steel, and if they hadn't sort of botched Superman's death and return, I think a lot of added power could have been attributed to what Hans Zimmer did, but they went in a different direction, as we all know.
Yeah, I liked it. I enjoyed it. It's you can't compare the two.
You can't.
Yeah, it's unfair. It's really unfair to what Hans Zimmer did and to those movies. But yeah, I thought it was impressive. I liked it a lot. But I completely get why it's your number one. I know I said Black Panther's my favourite of all time. But
have we changed your mind?
I don't know. I think maybe. I can't. I don't think I can argue this, can I? I mean, he is the best.
There's the difference between favourite and best.
Yeah. I know.
So,
but I can't. It's hard to argue against this being the best, though, isn't it? I mean, it really is. But we've gone through some brilliant pieces here. There's things that we're going to rediscover. There's things that hopefully you, the listeners, are going to rediscover, or we've excited you to put it on now. You know, some of this great music. A lot of it's on Spotify. You know, if you haven't got the CDs, although do buy them. Do actually buy the CDs because, you know, or digitally or whatever, because you'll get much more from it if you're actually collecting it and owning it and things like that. So yeah. I mean, is there anything you want to bring up particularly?
As I was saying, I got so many honourable mentions. I think The Incredible. If this was even a top 10 or top 15, I think The Incredibles would be in it. Michael Giacchino's work for that is sensational. Danny Elfman's Spider-Man work is really, really great. Spider-Man 1 and 2. And while we're talking about Spider-Man, there's been there's a lot of Spider-Man media the last couple of years which have had great Spider-Man scores. John Pisano did the Spider-Man score for the Spider-Man PS4 game, and that really nails the essence of the character in a way that might be even superior to Danny Elfman's work at times. It's fantastic. That main theme is phenomenal. And then Daniel Pemberton, who is not the obvious choice for a superhero score, really knocked out of the park with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which was my favourite film of 2018. And the final rendition of Miles' theme that we get in that, the track name of which escapes me at this point in time for some reason. Spider-Man Loves You. That's what the track is called. And that track is brilliant because we sort of see elements of that Spider-Man theme dotted in the score and in the film at various points. But that final rendition is when sort of Miles is at the end of his initial origin story journey, and he's at sort of peak confidence mode, and that's reflected in the track in a really big way. And I really, really like that. Unbreakable, James Newton Howard.
That's a great choice. That's a really good choice.
And it really bugged me that he didn't return for Glass, because you can tell. I mean, the film is disappointing, and the big reason why is because the score just doesn't work, and it's just there, and it's not memorable in any way, shape, or form. And I know that if James Newton Howard was on board for it, that would have been a much different story. So that was a shame. But yeah, there's been a lot of really great scores in the genre, and I'm sure there will be in future.
Absolutely. Sean, you got any honourable mentions or any other business you wanna cover before we wrap things up?
Just in other news, just on not necessarily related to the superhero genre, but Bear McCreary has released his first track from Godzilla King of the Monsters, which is called Old Rivals. Ooh. And I listened to this last night, and it's insane. It's very, very striking. It's got vocals from System of a Down's Serge Tankian. It's a bit of an onslaught of various styles, taiko drums, sort of explosive choral work. Very, very interesting. Very different from what Alexandre Desplat did with the 2014 movie, and I hold Desplat's work for that film up as one of the greatest blockbuster scores of recent years. I loved what he did with that. It was dark as hell, really sort of thunderous, sort of booming score. I love that. I'm really excited to see what Bear McCreary is going to do with this new movie. Because I think we've spoken about him before, haven't we? He's a really, really good rising up and coming composer. So yeah, I'd encourage people to go and listen to that and crank up the volume because it's very interesting.
Yeah,
I'm a fan of Ben McCreary for sure. His God of War score for the recent God of War game is fantastic. I highly recommend seeking that out. But what are your thoughts then on listening to scores before watching the film?
Ooh,
that's a good question.
I mean, that's probably a question for another podcast. But I'm just intrigued now, saying that you listened to a track from Godzilla already.
Yeah.
No, it is a good question. That it is. I mean, it's a running joke on this podcast that I've never seen the films, Sean has always seen them, beforehand or usually around the time, and I'm always going, oh no, I've got to see that later. So we often come at this on Between the Notes from different perspectives, and I'll go away and listen to the score, and Sean has got it with the context of the movie. But so I think we both have different experiences with it, and it does depend, doesn't it, Sean? Really on, I suppose, what the score is and what the movie is as to whether or not you have a better experience before or you wait for the film?
Yeah, I mean, normally I would wait for the film. It doesn't bother me listening to the score autonomously before I've watched the film. The only thing that I would worry about there is if there are any spoilers in the music or in the track titles. That's what would make me wary in that instance. I mean, sometimes when I've interviewed a composer, I'm sent the score in advance. Sometimes I haven't seen the film, which kind of puts me in a bit of an awkward position because I'm like, okay, I need to hear the music without having seen the film in order to talk to the person who's written it. Which is, I mean, that happened with Us, the Mike Labels. I chatted to Mike Labels about his brilliant score for Us. He's so
fantastic score.
Yeah, and the score is so, he's so funny. You can clearly see why him and Jordan Peele are good partners. Labels has got a really dark sense of humour, as Jordan Peele does. But I actually listened, I think, to half of the score on its own, and then just purely through happenstance, I paused and then I went and go to golf and do something else. And then I watched the film, at that point not having listened to the other half of the score. I was like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't do that, because I would have spoiled the entire ending of the movie if I'd understood, if I'd listened to the music. I'm like, hang on, why is that happening at that point? So I came to the movie fresh and then heard the second half of the score in concert. It's like, good. That's probably a rule for me in future, not to listen to the music in advance of the movie where possible.
And I'm certainly glad I didn't listen to Endgame before I watched the film, for sure. I think that's a great example of where, as we've talked about, the power of what you see on screen with those, with that music is worth waiting for. Definitely.
Absolutely. I'm not sure I would have had the same response at certain massive moments in the film if I already had listened to the music, for sure.
Before we go, Amon, it's been great to have you on the show. You're welcome back anytime. It's been really nice to bring you on for this. So thanks for joining us. And where can you direct people to for more Amon?
Yeah, when I'm not sitting on my porch watching the sunrise over a great canvas, you can find me on Twitter at @Warmann. And again, my pin tweet there is my summer 2019 blockbuster montage, which you can watch now.
They're always great fun. They are.
Thank you.
Every year, they're really good to watch. Yeah, so definitely check that out, guys. It's really, really good. All right, so yeah, thanks for listening. This has been a bumper edition, but we hope you've enjoyed all our superhero movie chat. So until next time, enjoy the film music you're listening to, and we'll be back to discuss more music when we return on Between the Notes. Between the Notes is produced and edited by Tony Black, who hosts alongside Sean Wilson. You can find Tony on Twitter at AJBlackWriter and Sean on Twitter at Seano22. You can find Between the Notes on Twitter at BTW_notes, on iTunes, your podcast app of choice, on Spotify, Stitcher, and on Spreaker, where the show is part of the We Made This podcast network. For more podcasts all about TV, film, books, music, and popular culture in general, you can find We Made This on Facebook and on Twitter at We Made This Pod. Thanks for listening.